Hello and welcome to Community Bookstore's virtual event series. I'm Stephanie Valdez, co-owner of the bookstore. Tonight, we're delighted to have Kimberly McCreight with us virtually to celebrate her latest book, Friends Like These. She's joined tonight by Cristina Alger. Community Bookstore will be celebrating 50 years in business this fall, and we credit the support of readers and writers for this big milestone. Thank you so much for spending an evening with us. Now for some housekeeping, you should be able to see and hear our presenters, but they cannot see or hear you. If you'd like an audio transcription, you can turn that on at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions for the authors, you can click on the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen to submit them. We'll ask some of those questions at the end of the program. There's also a chat button at the bottom through which I'll be posting a link to purchase a copy of tonight's book if you haven't already. We will have signed copies. Kimberly will be coming to the bookstore to sign copies for us this weekend. And finally, we've scheduled a whole host of fall programming for you. For instance, on Tuesday, 9/14, we have Daniel Barbin-Levin. He joins us to discuss Slonim Woods 9, which is a stunning firsthand account of the creation of a modern cult under conman Larry Ray at Sarah Lawrence College. Now I'll tell you a bit about tonight's guests and we'll get started. Kimberly McCreight's novel, Reconstructing Amelia, has been optioned by HBO and Nicole Kidman's Blossom Films, and A Good Marriage is coming soon from Amazon and Blossom Films. McCreight is also the author of the New York Times bestselling young adult trilogy, The Outliers, optioned for film by Lionsgate and Reese Witherspoon's Pacific Standard. She attended Vassar College and graduated cum laude from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She lives near us in Brooklyn, New York. Cristina Alger is the New York Times bestselling author of Girls Like Us, The Banker's Wife, The Darlings, and This Was Not the Plan. A graduate of Harvard College and NYU Law School, she worked as a financial analyst and a corporate attorney before becoming a writer. She lives in Manhattan with her husband and children. And I'll turn things over to you, Kim and Cristina.
Thank you so much. It's such a joy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this with you.
Oh, well, thanks so much for being here, Cristina, and thank you to Community Bookstore, which is my local indie. I'm thrilled that they're hosting me here again. I'm thrilled that you could be here, and I really appreciate it.
No, I'm excited that I got to read an early copy. So because I did, and it just came out, so I have to assume that most people haven't read this. Can you give us a sort of short synopsis of the book so people can know what it's about and without any spoilers, of course?
Sure. So it's Friends Like These is a story of a tight-knit group of college friends who reunite 10 years after graduation to head to a lavish upstate New York weekend home to stage an intervention for one in their group. It's an intervention that quickly goes terribly wrong. When the book opens, a car has been found deep in the woods. There is one of the friends is dead inside, another one is missing. And when the local detective shows up to investigate, she can tell the rest of the friends are hiding something. So the book is first and foremost definitely a page-turning mystery that I hope keeps you on the edge of your seat, delivers a big twist at the end. But it is also an exploration of friendship and the complicated ways friendships evolve over time, the dangerous side of loyalty, and the complexities of groupthink, which I think affect a lot of groups of friends and the decisions they sometimes make, for better and for worse.
So when you started writing this and when you started writing your other books, I mean, do you start with a premise? Do you start with a character? You said it's really a book about friendship. Is that sort of your starting place, or do you have a setting in mind?
Yeah, so it really depends. For me, it's a little bit different with each book. In this instance, one of my, it was definitely inspired, first and foremost by my tight-knit group of college friends who, like, to this day really are my family. And so I've always kind of wanted to write a book about friendship because my relationships with them, and particularly like having become friends with them in college, was a really seminal thing for me and remains that way. So it was always something I was interested in. This book was actually inspired by an actual weekend. One of my very dear college friends, her name is Kara, she's probably on this tonight, has this gorgeous upstate weekend home that I went to in the Catskills, not in Catskill, which is the fictional town where I set my book. So none of the bad things I say about the town are actually about any real town. But anyway, so she has this gorgeous house, and I went up there, and there was something about that weekend and being there, and she had this kind of party, this gathering with all the other like weekenders, people who had weekend houses, who were all from the city, and they're all these like really glamorous people. And that party, I really thought like, this is a book. And particularly when I thought about that party, but also thought about the town or towns nearby, not actually that particular town, but towns in the area. And a lot of them are struggling economically. And so you have this and I think this happens in a lot of places, you have this kind of thing with the locals and weekenders or people who are there for the summer, and the tension there. So that was like the spark, that piece of it. But again, the heart of the book is about friendship. So, for me, I really, I came away from the weekend, I was like, well, that's a book. But of course, as you know, like that's not a book. That's like an image, right? Like that's like an idea, which is funny because people often like share with you their book ideas and you're like, yeah, that's not a book idea. That's like that's like a picture. That was a starting place. And I thought there's something there. Like I'm really intrigued by that idea, but that it took a long time to evolve into something that really felt like it had legs, and could become an actual book. And then, when I'm writing, I start in that place, but I don't have it all worked out beforehand. So, the rest of it kind of came piecemeal over time.
So what is your process then? You don't start with, do you outline or not at all? Are you
I don't outline at all.
Okay.
So this is when I'm going to try to get all your secrets I did this earlier today with Lucy Foley, and I'm just going to try to find out how you do it better than me. And then I'm going to steal your techniques. So I hope you have good ideas for me. I'm going to do that. So no, I don't outline.
Okay.
Because I don't know how to outline. Not because I think it's a bad idea. If I could outline, I would. I think it sounds like a great idea. Like how great to know the whole story you're going to write. Because I know on the days when I get up and I know where I'm going just that day, how freeing it is. You just get up and then you write the problem is not writing words. I mean, right. that is really actually really the easy part. The problem is being able to see in the dark, right? Like to have any idea where you're headed next. And so unfortunately, I can't figure that out except through the tactile process of writing. And I really see the entire thing like a movie unfolding. So I have to kind of get myself in that space and see what's happening. And so I sit down, you do have to figure out some things, at least, I do have to figure out my point of view characters, essentially the timeline, how it's going to break down. I have a sense of the spine because there's what happened. Like I have a sense of like, okay, we're going to begin here. For instance, in this case, the book opens with the two people in the car, one dead or one missing. And so like I knew that. I have a general sense of the twist usually, because the twist usually ties thematically more broadly to something that I'm writing about in the book. So I have those pieces, and some of those will even change over time, but I start there and then I really just sit down and I write linearly. So like I'm switching, I start with one character and then go to, whatever the back and forth of the characters in the book as you read it will be how I originally wrote it. And that will then, in subsequent drafts, when I revisit it to revise it, I often pull it apart. So like I would just be looking at certain characters or just be looking at certain timelines and look at it separately. And, but yeah, so that initial drafting process is really like a 3-month thing. Like I can write a first draft of a book in like 3 months. To be clear, that is a terrible book. It's a really bad book. I joke about there being like, the hit by the bus draft. Like that's when I get like in the place, like if I get hit by a bus, do you have that too? Like where if somebody read this, they would not think that I was completely talentless and terrible. So like, but in actuality, that's like draft like 7. Like it takes actually a long time for me to get to that draft where I think like somebody could take over for me and finish if they had to. So that revision process is like a 9-month process. So it's that's where all my work is, right? So, and in that process is where I really find the story. And so like I find all the threads, then I know the characters, then I'm like, well, what they were doing back here doesn't make any sense. I figure out what I'm trying to do. And to me, like that is the most thrilling part of the process. And like why I do it is for those moments where you're like, oh, like that's what I was doing. And it's a really subconscious, it's the magic part of it that I feel like I can't really control and I can't do anything about. And each time I kind of sit down to write a book, I pray it happens, where it clicks into place and I can see what I'm doing. And then once you can see what you're doing, I think that then you can go back and tighten everything up and then worry about like, really getting depth of character. And the kind of the last thing I start worrying about is like description and voice and language, which makes it hard because you can't really have somebody come in to read your work or to participate with you until you're very far along, because I want to be like, just don't worry about the words, like the don't worry about the sentences. But it's hard. I mean, my editor Jennifer Barth was very good with Friends Like These coming in very early, but you have to be like, I'll fix the rest of it, like just don't worry about that part. But you have to have somebody who can see through that to participate. So do you outline your things at the beginning?
Oh, I mean, I aspire to. I aspire to. So my first book, I did not. I mean, I wrote my first book for fun when I was working as a lawyer, and it was just a passion project. And after that, I realized that I probably should have some kind of structure, or else I just kept sort of, going down rabbit holes and then deleting huge chunks of my draft. So I now have kind of, I'd say, yes, I have maybe like a 5-page outline that I'm working off of. So I don't have every chapter outlined, but I have a general sense of, I just need it. It's like my security blanket. Like the idea of just going forth into the darkness terrifies me. So I guess I'm just too risk averse for it. But so you don't even know where you're going to end up, or you said you have basic plot twists mapped out, because I really don't. I'm making it sound like I have absolutely no idea what I'm doing. I'm making it sound like I have more of an idea than I actually do. No, I really have absolutely no idea. I mean, I know that the feeling I'm trying to capture. So, right. Like, so I know thematically how I want you to feel when you're done reading the book, but there are a million ways, right? You could evoke a particular set of emotions. So, and I know overall that not the message, but that again, the themes I'm looking at exploring, but I really don't. I'm overstating even what I know when I start out. I really don't know anything. I just have as I write, I do start to keep a working outline. So which usually involves like notes like go back and make this better. Right. Yes, I'm a big believer in that note. Really insightful things like that. But just so I can keep track of thoughts I had, like sometimes I start to make connections. But I really try not to overthink it when I start, because I feel like any amount of overthinking it risks like getting hung up and not being able to finish a draft. So I tried to just power ahead and just not think. And just worry about that whole Anne Lamott, bird by bird, scene by scene, just like keep it really small and just do what I set out to do that day. So I really just try to have that, to the seeing to the edge of my headlights kind of thing. Yeah. So how did you start? What was your sort of transition? Because you were an attorney also. Is that? I was. You and I have never talked about this. We'll have to get offline, have a lengthy. I know. For all we know, we worked at the same place. We don't even know. So yeah, I practiced for, I guess, 3 years or so. And then I took a leave of absence to write my first book, with a plan that I was going to write a book in a year and sell it. And then I was going to not be a lawyer anymore, which is like so laughable now that I'm in the book industry. I realize how every part of that, the plan was like flawed, but I did write the book in a year. I did get an agent and I did almost sell it. But there you go. Yeah, there you go. But I didn't sell it. And so, my agent at the time, who's not my agent now, was kind of like, just go write another book. You got so close, you just write another book. And I was not trained as a writer. I mean, I just, like I think a lot of people who end up writing books, you figure it out
you have to learn how to write a book. You also have to learn how to write your book, which is its own issue. So I ended up, eventually I wrote a second book actually in the mornings while working as a lawyer. I would write, it sounds like maybe you did the same thing. I would write like 3 a.m. to 7 a.m. and then I would go to work. And
3 a.m. that's serious commitment. I was not up at God bless you. I was not up at 3 a.m., but that's really impressive. Okay, so you did it in the morning.
I did that. And then when I finished that book, I really thought like all I had to do was finish that book and I was going to sell it. So I finished that book, and then my agent wrote back that, again, not my agent now. That agent at the time wrote me a note and was like, this book is not only unsellable, it's unsalvageable. Which,
oh God,
yeah, it was really brutal. Especially because once you're in the industry, like to say it's unsalvageable, it's like, wow, like really,
yeah.
we can't do anything with this.
There's nothing to be done.
Like, set it on fire, like just take it out in the yard and burn it. So that was bad. And but that's when I realized that like my entire approach to this, like thinking I could do this, in some quick way, was really flawed. And so I ended up giving myself more time. I guess I had these deadlines in my head, and eventually left the practice of law and was writing more hours at a time. But it still took me from there. I wrote 2 more books that went unpublished. And from the time I wrote my first book to the time I sold Amelia was 11 years.
Wow.
And Amelia was my 5th completed manuscript. I was on my 3rd agent by the time I sold Amelia. So that was a 2-book deal when I finally sold it. But yeah, if you had told me at the beginning that it was going to be that long, I don't know if I would have signed up for it. But once you get in it, and you do get some positive feedback, and writing is a craft, right? So you get better at it the more you do it. And so I just was a big believer. I was like, surely if I just like work really hard at that, like now I realize that like, no, actually you could work really hard at it forever and never sell a book. That's actually true. I was just a little bit, I think I was naive enough to get lucky. I stuck with it because I just had this belief that hard work would kind of win the day, which again, sometimes you're lucky. It's lucky to be naive.
But you must have been a big reader, I assume, because I feel like that's the common denominator of all writers, is that you start off as a reader and someone who loves to consume fiction.
I'm not a huge reader.
Really?
Yeah, no, like I wouldn't say I really come at writing from the perspective of almost visual art, which is weird. Which is where I get most of my inspiration. Like if I am feeling like I need to be inspired, I tend to go to galleries and look at really modern art. Like the Whitney Biennial is like my favorite thing. It's just like people who like just conceptual artists have like no, they just are so brave, and I feel like I connect to that. This the way they build a story in their art that I connect to. So I read for sure, but I didn't come to writing as a reader. I don't feel
so
that.
Interesting.
I know it's kind of like, I know it kind of makes me a bit of an outlier. So it's not something I tend to advertise. But it, again, I have read books, but I'm not a voracious, like most authors that I know, walked around reading everything they could get their hands on as a little kid. And
yeah,
I feel like came to it first as somebody wanting to tell a story, and seeing it visually and wanting to kind of create from that perspective.
But that's why I think your books translate so well to film and television, probably, because your books are really visual. Like you can see it while it's happening. And I find that to be why your books are so compelling, because you're sort of, it's like watching a terrific, limited series or something, and you just want to know what the next scene is. So can you talk a little bit about the film development projects that you're, past, present, future?
Yeah. So all my books at some point have been optioned. as I'm sure knowing the process too, like sometimes things stay optioned for years, they get re-optioned and re-optioned, and sometimes they don't. So, or sometimes they get optioned by somebody new. But 2 projects in active development are with both with Nicole Kidman's Blossom Films. One is Reconstructing Amelia is at HBO, and A Good Marriage is at Amazon. And A Good Marriage is being written by David Farr, who wrote The Night Manager. Which is,
oh God, he's so good. That's fantastic.
Yeah, he's amazing. And I can tell you just from the questions he asked that he's very, very, very smart. And the kind of where you're like, that's a good question. Why did I? So yeah, he's very gifted. So I'm very excited to see what he does with it. So they're both meant to be series. And Friends Like These has been optioned by Steven Spielberg's Amblin Television.
Awesome.
And I am adapting that one. So I have never done that before. So
that was my next question. So
yeah.
What are you doing to prepare for that? I find that such an interesting, I mean, people ask me, I'm sure you've been asked a million times, like, would you want to adapt your own work? And I always kind of panic because to me, it seems like a totally different discipline. It's like asking like a ballerina if she wants to be a gymnast or something. Like they're sort of closely linked, but also totally different. So have you read books? Are you reading other screenplays? Like, what are you doing to sort of move into that headspace?
Those are all good ideas, Cristina. Just kidding. I'm kidding. So yeah, I had written a couple scremaplays.
Oh, okay, you've done it before.
That have not gone anywhere. I mean,
yeah.
I've written them, and so I had a real interest in doing it. As we talked about, my stuff is very visual. I think that's something about kind of story being so at the forefront in that medium, as opposed to language being more at the forefront in fiction. So something about screenplays is very appealing to me to be able to manipulate story in that way more transparently was something I have really wanted to do. So I knew I wanted to do it, but I do think the idea of adapting your own work is slightly different than writing something original. And I will say in the abstract, I was worried about that. This is a bit of a unique situation because I just wrote it and I have written the beginning of another book, but I am still a bit in this world, in the world itself. So it really feels like an extension of the book in a weird way. Like all I can say is it feels incredibly natural. And I would have told you that I would have felt panicked too. Like that the thought of adapting my own stuff did make me worried about like a year ago when I was thinking about it, and now doing it, it's just really feels very organic. And I don't know if it's because I'm almost still in the book. So the idea of change, as I think a lot of people think when you write a book that you don't change it. And if you're a novelist, it's just your story, but you work with editors and, or maybe it's because of the way I revise, I don't know, but I feel like I'm spending all my time changing the book. So to continue changing it in this way doesn't feel that far afield. And again, seeing the story conceptually in this way, I don't know. So far it's coming naturally. I mean, it's very early in the process. So we'll see. And of course I did, obviously I did spend a lot of time reading other people's, pitch documents and other people's scripts, and to kind of watch how they do that, they translate it, just the intellectual process. And it is a particular thing, but you can pick up on it pretty quickly, just by seeing what it came from, what it turned into, and how they made that leap.
That's exciting. That's super exciting. I can't wait to hear more about it. So are you working on a novel as well? Or are you working?
Yeah. So I've written about 100 pages. My age is like not 100 pages. It's 80.
We'll call it 100.
All right. I was going to round up to 100, but it's probably like 80 pages of a new book that is kind of, it's sample pages, in other words, of a new book, which I am really excited about. I've been thinking of it as kind of like an inverted Reconstructing Amelia. It's about a mother in Park Slope, and her daughter, who goes to NYU, is a college student. And at the beginning of the book, they have a contentious relationship, and the daughter's a free spirit. The mother's like this control freak lawyer, and her daughter comes home finally reluctantly to have dinner with her mother. And when she arrives, the food's burning on the stove and her mother is gone. And so the daughter is got to dig into her mother's life to figure out what happened to her. And, it's a lot about the two of them finding common ground through this process, and her realizing she didn't know who her mother was or is. So anyway, yeah, so I just started it, but to me, it's really interesting because my kids were so young when I wrote Reconstructing Amelia. So it's really interesting now, all these years later, to look at the inverse and think about the possibilities, the narrative possibilities there.
That's really exciting. I love that idea. That's a wonderful premise. So you're working on that, and you're working on the adaptation at the same time. And is Reconstructing Amelia is it being adapted, or is it
so that's
process?
Yeah, that's also with Boss and Nicole Kidman, but it's at HBO.
Okay.
So they are working on that. There's people attached and exciting things happening that are not my facts to share. So I'll be shared by somebody, because that would be fun. But it's not my information to share.
So when you, what is your typical sort of day like? I mean, do you sit down with, do you have set hours? Do you have an office somewhere? How do you sort of set up your writer life?
Yeah, so I work at the Brooklyn Writer Space.
Okay.
So shout out to the Brooklyn Writer Space. I'll sell the desks at the Brooklyn Writer Space, as long as you don't sit in my desk, because I have a very specific desk that I like. I've been working there for a few years now, and I work 9 a.m. to 7:30, at least 5 days a week, sometimes more, depending. This past weekend I had to work the weekend, so it really kind of is deadline driven a bit, but I have always, even in those years when I couldn't sell a book, I have really strived to treat it like a job. I just think psychologically for me, that works better, and also allows me to create. I don't know if you have trouble with this, but I think when you're a writer, probably a small business owner too, it's hard to get separation between your work and the rest of your life, because you're always working. You're always trying to work something out, or the story never really goes away. So as a way of trying to create some sort of separation, I try to go to an office, try to keep regular hours, try to make it as much like any other job, because I think that helps, at least me, to create for the whole thing. It makes it easier to take notes from other people. Like, the more you can yes, it's art, and I think it's really important in a first draft to like embrace that and lose yourself in that, and like that's where the art is, and those early drafts, and like the moment of creation. But for the rest of it, I feel like it's helpful if you can try to make it feel more like a job.
Yeah, for sure. I think especially when you've come from something as structured as law firm life, it's, jumping off the deep end into, having no boss and no colleagues is really overwhelming. So,
right. What you just heard basically was a total control freak trying to explain it. It just like create control around completely uncontrollable.
Well, especially now more than ever. I mean, now, everyone's working from home, and having separation between work life and personal life is almost impossible. So
Absolutely.
It's, especially if you have somewhere to go. And do you have writer friends that are also there, that work there?
I do. I do have writer friends. They're not mostly there. And I will say that I'm not the most social member of the anybody who's like belongs there is like, she doesn't talk to anybody. I just really I'm there to work. And so it's not, I'm not a big, let's have coffee in the middle of the day, because I'd rather just kind of get home earlier. So no, I wouldn't say I'm especially chatty while at the Brooklyn Writer Space, but stop by and say hello if you work there.
Quickly, just really quickly.
Yeah. And right, just as you're walking past.
So do you have, if people ask you, I feel like I get asked often what advice you would give to people that want to write, or people that are currently writing. What do you typically say? Yeah,
I love to give advice, because I feel like when I was struggling, I was always in search of,
Yeah.
it just advice anywhere about anything. Especially when you're first starting out, you don't have a community and maybe you're the only person that's writing. I feel like it could be very isolating. So, and in general, it's a solitary pursuit, right? So I think that one of my most important pieces of advice is to lower your standards when you're writing. I know nobody on my team will be happy to hear me say that, but I think it's really important because I think that with so many people who are starting out, either to write a book or write anything, are so hypercritical of themselves, and then they stop because they're like, well, I don't know what I'm doing next, or this feels bad, or that was a bad day, and therefore I am talentless, and this is going nowhere. And I just feel like all those people should know that, like, we all feel that way, like 95% of the time.
It's normal. You should feel that way every day. Every day is a bad day.
That you're exactly on schedule. It really has. I wrote some 10 tips for writers or something, and it really has no bearing on the outcome. In fact, what you're writing might be terrible. It might be, and some days it will be for sure, and you'll throw out those pages. But it's just part of it. You just have to learn to ignore that feeling and just keep going. And with my approach, I never look back for that reason, because everything I do, as you were saying, you do an outline it gives you comfort to have that outline. And I think the main thing is find those techniques or tricks that are going to give you comfort and allow you to finish the draft.
Yes.
So whatever that is, I mean, if that's do an outline, don't do an outline, show a chapter to a friend as soon as you do it, then do that. I don't think you should do that, but if you want to do that, you can. I think that's a terrible idea. But I don't think you should get feedback while you're working at something, but some people that works for them. So, I think it is really listen to your instincts about how you work. And the thing is, we all do this in different areas of our life. Do you like to make your bed in the morning? Do you we all have ways we like to live our life, and that bring us comfort and make it life easier to live. And I think you want to follow that same approach with your writing and say, what things can I do here that are just going to let me finish the draft? Because you cannot fix something that is not finished. And that is the one truism. So the goal here is to just finish the draft. And once the draft is done and the whole story is there, then it becomes a different process. And then you have, a completed book, and you can, anything that is finished can be fixed, except apparently my second book.
I was going to say, except the unsalvageable, but
except that book could be fixed. But most things can be fixed, but certainly you're nowhere if you stop halfway. And once you're experienced, sometimes it'll be the case that you've written 100 pages or more, and you realize really this book is going nowhere. But for writers starting out, the chances of you really knowing that, I feel like most oftentimes you should push through, unless you've really, really gotten to a place where you feel like you started in the wrong direction or something. Try to get a draft done, and then it may be that you're going to end up throwing out half that book once it's done, but the best part of the book might be the second half. And so anyway, I feel like just lower your standards. Let every day when you write, it can be bad, it doesn't matter, no one's going to see it, and it's just for you. And so just keep proceeding with that in mind, and so you can get something finished, and so you can make it great. And that all can be done in revision. Revision is not spelling and little tweaks of language. It's a wholesale changing of everything. But it's easier, as you said, with having a scaffolding. When once you have it in place, you can start to have the freedom to move things around.
You're a runner, aren't you? Is that?
I am. Yes, you are too, right?
I am. I was gonna say, I feel like that's such a runner's mentality, one foot in front of another, and you just sort of, you can't think about it as you're a marathoner. I'm not. So but you can't think of it as 21 miles or whatever. You have to just sort of think I'm gonna, live in this sort of step to step. I just think it's a way of going through life that you have to go back to when you're writing, and sort of bird by bird mentality.
It is. And a lot of the reason why I run a lot is to kind of, they reinforce each other. But really just, the belief that when you start running, especially long distances, also to be clear, I'm very slow. I just want to throw that in.
I'm very slow also, but
very slow. But you really, it feels like it is utterly impossible. Like you're like, in mile one, you're like, there is no possible way, ever, and this is never happening. And I really feel that way. Like I'm not a natural athlete. And so the same thing is true with writing. And so for me, the reason in part I do the running is I'm like, wait, I know this feeling. Like it doesn't mean it's actually impossible. It just means that it feels impossible right now. And so I need to just ignore it. Like there's so much you just need to ignore. Like acknowledge it, it's there, but just continue on despite it.
That's such good. I think that's good life advice, right? Like you just have to lace up your shoes and like there are times when you have to just ignore things and lower your standards and get through the day.
Right. That's basically my life advice right there.
That's going to be my new parenting model. Lower standards.
A memoir, right? Just like that. Lower your standards, lace up your shoes.
So I think this will be my last question, so we can do Q&A. And if people want to ask questions, they can ask it in the chat. But what have you read, I don't know, in recent memory that you've loved, and what are sort of the books that you go back to as your sort of touchstone books, if you were, however you want to interpret that, sort of childhood favorites, lifetime favorites, whatever you think is the, comes to your mind first.
Well, something I finished recently that I thought was fantastic was Razor Blade Tears.
So good.
Crosby, so good.
So good.
I actually listened to it on, so I shouldn't have said read, I listened to it on audio while running. Got his like command of language. Like he did that thing for mystery writers, like what you strive to do is to be able to get kind of the emotion and the description and all that stuff in, but you don't have a lot of space to do it. And so, we are all striving to do that, like people who are writing in this space, but it's hard because you can't slow it down. It was so evocative right from the beginning. Like you felt the people like so vividly and this place so vividly. But yet like, it was just invisible the way he did it. So I thought that was so good. And I also read Three Women recently, which I thought was fantastic. And I do read a lot of nonfiction when I'm working because I find it hard, particularly to read directly in the space, the mystery space, because I find it either I'm just spending all my time looking at the machinery of what the other person's doing, and either feeling usually feeling just bad about what I'm doing. I'm like, wait, they did this. Like it just becomes like, I'm like, I don't want to do that. So I don't do that much. But I also read for the first time this summer, I read The Bell Jar, which I had never read, which was just beautiful and so modern in so many ways. And I think that, and I guess my point about all that reading is, and there's another book like I go back to, the book The Hours, Michael Cunningham, The Hours, and he obviously was the way that story was structured was a rotating points of view characters that actually, the stories were linked thematically rather than, from a plot perspective. But those were the things that inspired me when at first, rather than even being in the mystery space, when I was looking at doing multiple point of view characters. And I think you can get so much from books that are nothing like what you're writing. Right? Like, and I actually think you can get sometimes the most valuable things from those other kinds of books. And to think that like in Three Women, the language was gorgeous. And it's a good reminder again, like she was, writing about, it was nonfiction, but she still had, beautiful sentences. And so, it's a reminder to try to do that in your own work, even when that's not the main point necessarily.
Awesome. Well, should we move to the Q&A, or I can
do it?
Asking questions. Okay.
I'm back. I'm ready for the Q&A.
She's back.
Okay. Matoko Rich asks, how do you balance your instinct with your editor's advice? When do you know when to say no to a trusted editor, agent, or friend?
What I love best about virtual events is Matoko is a friend of mine, and she is in Japan, and it always brings me such delight that she can be here on my launch, which out of all the bad things of virtual launches, it's really a great thing that people across the world can be there. So that is hard question. I think that I try to listen first. And I think to it kind of embedded in that question was the word, how do you balance? And I think you balance. And I think there are certain things where giving good notes and also learning to interpret even good notes is a skill. And so a lot of times, sometimes what people tell you is just, you're just going to want to execute it directly and that's simple. And then sometimes you're going to get a note where you're like, well, they always have a point. Like people who give notes, like 99% of notes, like there's something of value in them. It may not be that. Oftentimes people will give notes and will also tell you how to execute. Like they'll say, go fix this. And sometimes the thing you should change, that's not what you should do. But the thing that's bothering them, whatever made them react, that is the important thing. And that is something you need to listen to. So you've got to figure out, like, how can you address whatever it was that tripped them up in a way that feels consistent and organic with your story. And this isn't because, I think when I was first starting out, I was more just really attached to the story I was telling. And I was like, I have to tell the story because of whatever. It's just because you know your story better and you know what's going to work and what's not going to work. And so I think it's really important to take notes as much as you can, because I think it's a real act of generosity for people to give you notes and to never look at them like it's an attack or it's a criticism or whatever. But I do think you ultimately do have to keep your instincts and never do something that feels like wrong, because it probably is what you're trying to execute probably is wrong. So again, it's a delicate balance. But in general, first of all, pick good people to give you notes. I think that's the first threshold question. So that if you're working with people whose judgment you really trust, like if they're saying something, my editor is saying something, like she's right. If my agent is saying something, they're right about the thing they're saying. It may be that my fix is going to be slightly different than the fix they suggested. And so that, like, the devil's in the details, like, how exactly to address it. Like sometimes I have to come around the side and do something slightly different than they imagined to reach it. But always, they're going to be right that there's a problem in that spot that they just pointed to. And so like I said, it's a balance.
That's so interesting. I've rarely heard other writers be so generous about their reception of other people's notes.
I'm just so generous. So if my editor and agent are on here, I just want you to know I'm so generous.
Nicole Kier asks, how do you think the pandemic has impacted your writing, either in terms of your process or the content or just in general?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's impacted all of us, right, in every conceivable way, right, from top to bottom. It was very difficult. I wrote part of Friends Like These in the deep beginning of the lockdown, when we were fully locked down and I couldn't go to the writer space, and I reverted to waking up at 3 a.m. because I just can't write if I know anybody's even in my space awake. So I had to do that, which was tough. I think that it's just been so disruptive, so it's hard to find space. But I will say, for me, and I think this has been really true during the pandemic, like everyone has needed to do during this time the things that they needed to do. And I think that's really different for every person. So for a lot of people, this was a time where you just couldn't get any work done because, for whatever reason, because of your family situation, or just because psychologically it was impossible. For me, writing is an escape. So it's a place to go. Luckily, that is a very lucky thing for me. So for me, writing Friends Like These during the pandemic was a place I got to go to that wasn't the pandemic. And that really was an outlet for me. But I do think there was so much during the pandemic that we should all emerge with our pandemic book or our whatever, I feel like all of that is ridiculous, and it certainly put pressure on all of us in so many ways. And we all cope differently. For me, it was lucky because it does bring me somewhere else, my writing, which I'm grateful for.
Okay, let's see. Laura Shapiro asked, how do you know when you're done with the first draft, the second draft, etc.?
Yeah, so the first draft, I'm just done when I have that final scene, which usually in the first draft is really terrible, where like I tell everybody what happened. And then the first draft, it's usually like just people saying what happened. So it's luckily with a mystery, it's a little clearer because kind of you have a reveal and you have that there is an ending, right? Like it's a when it's plot driven, the story comes to a conclusion. So I know when I delivered the ending. The revisions for me, again, with this most recent book, my editor was generous enough to jump in really early in the process. So that kind of getting to the place where I felt it was done never really happened because we started like revising as I was writing it. So that was a bit different. I feel like when it's done enough for submission, when I can read it without like it being excruciating, right? Like when I could be like, when I'm not trying to like rewrite every single sentence. For me, it's about how much ink is on it. So I write it and then I write over it in hand, with handwriting, pretty much once I get to like the second or third draft. And so whole pages I'll have back, it starts feeling like a handwritten process. So once there's like not that much ink on the pages is when I know, like when I'm able to read it and think, okay, I don't want to change every word, which again, it's probably like draft 7 usually when I get there.
Had another question that was similar that I think you pretty much answered was just how do you reach your final draft? So we'll move on from that. Elena Evangelo also asks, when big edits happen to a character arc, how do you manage to handle reworking a web that is woven throughout the book?
Yeah, no, that's like first you cry. It's the first thing you do. Christina's like, yes, you do.
Totally, yes. I have that same question.
Right. First thing is you cry. After you're done crying, yeah, you just have to do it little bit by little bit. It is one of the difficult, the knock-on effects for changes. Once you're far in, it is like with a mystery, particularly one that has many different threads, it's time consuming and tricky. And generally you need help at a certain point, like to see, if I do this, but I will say, if you revise something so many times, I tend to know the book so well by that point that if I make a change, I almost know which other pages that it's going to affect if I do that. And also if you have multiple narrators, if you make a change to a single character, that character is not in every scene or in the whole book. There's a limited amount of places that is going to have an effect. And so, yeah, the main thing is not to panic. I think and to just take it a little bit at a time.
Am I crazy to think that maybe some of your lawyerly skills would be applicable for understanding the ramifications of a change throughout an entire document? Is that crazy?
Yes. I think Cristina will agree. Don't you find that your training as a lawyer comes in handy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I feel like I'm in sort of an awful way, but you become very, yes, like redlining a document is like something I know how to do for better or worse. But yeah, I feel like, being a lawyer I think that's why so many writers were lawyers in their past life. I mean, you sort of love language and you learn how to, I don't know, like being a lawyer is like a practical application for liking to play with words on the page.
Yeah, and I think you become really like ruthless about the editorial process. And I think actually legal education helped me in terms of how I structure a mystery, because like part of what you do as a lawyer, particularly in law school, is there, you argue this side, but then you got to predict the counter argument and respond. You got to preemptively respond to it. And so a lot of what you're doing as a mystery writer is you're going to tell the reader one story, but then you got to predict what they're going to think, what they think you're doing. And then you've got to address that also. And so I do think that that way of thinking that law school teaches you really comes in handy, particularly if you're writing mysteries.
So interesting. Have you found community in the writing community at large, even if it's not at your workplace?
Cristina is reached out to me in a totally great way. Yes, absolutely. And I think writers, particularly in the mystery space are very supportive of one another. And absolutely. It helps because, again, like, it is a very solitary pursuit. And I don't think we have that much of an opportunity to spend time with each other or see each other, which is like one of the nice things about social media, is that you have a way to connect in that way. And for sure, there's no greater comfort than talking to other writers about their process. And, seeing that it is, even if their process is different than yours, it's that we're all kind of dealing with the same things at the end of the day.
So since we've now hit more than a year into hosting Zoom book events, I've now started asking people, how are you celebrating your book release other than Zoom events? What are you doing for yourself? Is it a dinner? Is it a party? How are you celebrating?
Yeah, it is sad to lose the book events. I mean, I remember, my last one at Community in the store, like it is a loss to not have, I mean, obviously such a small trivial loss compared to so many others, but it is really your chance to see, your family and your friends. But what was funny is actually my birthday is in September, but I've never had a September book before, but on Tuesday, everyone talks about it being your book birthday. I really forgot by the end of the day that it was not actually my birthday. By the end of the day, I was like, oh wait, no, it's actually not my birthday. It's actually just my book's birthday. So you find ways to celebrate it. And I actually tend to usually buy a really nice pair of shoes every time I have a book come out, but I haven't had a chance to do that yet. But I went out to dinner. I haven't eaten cupcakes yet, but I will. So I think that it is important to market, particularly if you have books come out with any frequency. It's easy to kind of get lost and to not take a minute and mark that it's out in the world. I took a great photo of my book in your window at Community Bookstore. So it's those things that, that market, and to know that it's really out in the world. And that's more important than a big party, for sure.
Well, I hope you still get your new book shoes, and we're looking forward to having you to the store to sign some books for us. Thank you both so much for spending the evening with us. Thanks to everybody who's watching, and it was great.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for hosting me again. And you know how much I love your store. And if any of you are anywhere near Park Slope, you have to go to Community Bookstore, because it's like just a gem. It's really a gem for all of New York City, definitely for Park Slope.
Well, thank you both, and be well, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Take care.